The town of Havenwood was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your dog's name, and probably what you had for breakfast. Nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling green hills, Havenwood was a picture postcard of small-town America. Children rode their bikes down Main Street without a worry, Mrs. Gable always had cookies baking in her window, and the annual town picnic was the highlight of the summer. Nothing bad ever happened in Havenwood, or so everyone thought. The houses were well kept, with manicured lawns and blooming flower beds. Neighbors chatted over fences, sharing gardening tips and the latest town gossip. The local diner, the Cozy Corner, was the heart of Havenwood, serving up hearty meals and endless cups of coffee. It was a place where secrets were shared, friendships were forged, and life moved at a slower, more comfortable pace. The biggest excitement usually involved the high school football team's Friday night games or the annual bake-off at the county fair. Sheriff Brody had been the law in Havenwood for over 20 years. He knew every resident, every street, and every back alley. His job mostly involved settling minor disputes, helping lost tourists, and occasionally chasing stray dogs. Serious crime was unheard of. The most exciting case he'd handled in recent memory was when someone stole Mrs. Gable's prize-winning zucchini. He often joked that his biggest challenge was staying awake during his night shifts. Havenwood was a safe haven, a place where people could sleep soundly knowing that their neighbors were watching out for them. That sense of security, however, was about to be shattered. The peaceful facade of Havenwood was about to crack, revealing a darkness that no one could have ever imagined lurking beneath the surface. Perched on the highest point overlooking Havenwood stood a house unlike any other in town. It wasn't just the size, although it was significantly larger than the cozy bungalows and quaint cottages that dotted the landscape. It was the sheer opulence, the obvious display of wealth that set it apart. This was the home of Mr. Sterling, the wealthy businessman who had moved to Havenwood a few years prior, bringing with him a whirlwind of rumors and speculation. Mr. Sterling was an enigma to the townsfolk. He kept to himself, rarely participating in town events and preferring the company of his own staff. Some whispered that he was involved in shady dealings, while others admired his success and attributed his aloofness to his busy schedule. His house, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, was a stark contrast to the traditional architecture of Havenwood. It was a symbol of his wealth and a constant reminder that he was an outsider, someone who didn't quite fit in. The house boasted panoramic views of the valley, a state-of-the-art security system, and a meticulously manicured garden that seemed to defy the natural beauty of the surrounding wilderness. It was a fortress of solitude, a place where Mr. Sterling could escape the prying eyes of the town and conduct his business in peace. The locals often wondered what went on behind those closed doors, what secrets were hidden within those walls. Little did they know, the answer to their questions would soon be revealed in the most dramatic and devastating way possible. Mr. Sterling's imposing home, once a symbol of success, would soon become the scene of a tragedy that would forever change the landscape of Havenwood, both literally and figuratively. The tranquility of Havenwood was shattered on a crisp autumn morning. The sun, usually welcomed with open arms, cast an eerie glow on the scene unfolding at Mr. Sterling's mansion. Yellow tape cordoned off the property, and Sheriff Brody, his face etched with a grim expression, stood surveying the scene. Mr. Sterling was dead. The discovery had been made by his housekeeper, Maria, who arrived for work to find the front door ajar and the house in disarray. Her screams alerted the few neighbors who lived nearby, and soon the authorities were on the scene. Mr. Sterling lay lifeless in his study, surrounded by overturned furniture and shattered glass. The scene pointed to a violent struggle. A valuable antique vase lay in pieces on the floor, and a rug was twisted at an odd angle, as if someone had been dragged across it. Sheriff Brody, despite his lack of experience with serious crime, knew immediately that this was no accident. The signs of a struggle were too obvious, the violence too deliberate. He called in Detective Sarah, a seasoned investigator from the neighboring county, to assist with the investigation. Detective Sarah arrived with her usual air of quiet authority, her keen eyes scanning the scene, missing nothing. The initial assessment confirmed Sheriff Brody's suspicions: Mr. Sterling had been murdered. The cause of death was a blow to the head, likely from a heavy object found near the body. Robbery didn't appear to be the motive, as valuable items were left untouched. This suggested a more personal motive, a crime fueled by anger or revenge. The investigation had begun, and the once peaceful town of Havenwood held its breath, waiting for the truth to be revealed. The secrets hidden within Mr. Sterling's walls were about to be unearthed, and the lives of many in Havenwood would be forever changed. Among the residents of Havenwood was Bob, a man known more for his bad luck than any particular talent. He worked odd jobs, never quite managing to make ends meet. Bob always seemed to be one step away from disaster, a cloud of misfortune perpetually hanging over his head. He was a familiar face at the cozy corner, nursing a cup of coffee and lamenting his latest woes to anyone who would listen. Recently, Bob's troubles had deepened considerably. He had borrowed a substantial sum of money from Mr. Sterling, hoping to invest in a get-rich-quick scheme that, predictably, went south. Now, he was deeply in debt, and Mr. Sterling was not known for his patience. Every encounter with Mr. Sterling left Bob increasingly anxious and desperate. The weight of his debt was crushing him, and he felt like he was running out of options. Detective Sarah, with her sharp intuition, quickly identified Bob as a person of interest. During her initial interviews with the townspeople, Bob's name kept surfacing. People mentioned his financial difficulties, his mounting debt to Mr. Sterling, and his increasingly erratic behavior. When Detective Sarah finally brought Bob in for questioning, he was a nervous wreck. He fidgeted in his chair, avoided eye contact, and stammered through his answers. He claimed to have been at home alone the night of the murder, but he couldn't provide any solid alibi. His story was riddled with inconsistencies, and his anxiety was palpable. Detective Sarah pressed him further, sensing that he was hiding something. Bob's hands trembled as he wiped the sweat from his brow. The pressure was mounting, and the walls were closing in. He knew he was a suspect, and he feared what the investigation would uncover. The secret he harbored was a dangerous one, and it threatened to destroy what little remained of his already precarious life. The pressure on Bob was immense. Detective Sarah's questioning had planted a seed of panic in his mind. He knew that if the truth came out, his life would be over. Desperate and increasingly irrational, Bob hatched a plan, a dangerous and desperate attempt to erase his connection to the crime. He would destroy the evidence, eliminate any trace that could link him to Mr. Sterling. He would burn the house down. The idea was reckless, but in Bob's frantic mind, it seemed like the only way out. He imagined the fire consuming everything, obliterating the scene of the crime and turning the investigation cold. He knew it was a huge risk, but the thought of spending his life in prison was even more terrifying. He spent the next day gathering supplies, cans of gasoline, matches, and gloves. He planned to carry out his desperate act under the cover of darkness, when the town was asleep and the chances of getting caught were minimal. As night fell, a sense of grim determination settled over Bob. He drove to Mr. Sterling's mansion, the house now eerily silent and still under police surveillance. He parked his car a distance away and crept through the woods, avoiding the main road. The house loomed before him, a dark silhouette against the night sky. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of fear and adrenaline coursing through his veins. He approached the house cautiously, checking to make sure no one was watching. The police presence seemed to have diminished, leaving only a single patrol car parked down the street. This was his chance. He slipped through a gap in the yellow tape and made his way to the back of the house, where he planned to start the fire. The fate of Havenwood, and his own, hung in the balance. He was committed to erasing the past, unaware that a tiny, unassuming object would survive the inferno and ultimately lead to his downfall. With trembling hands, Bob poured gasoline around the back of the house, dousing the wooden deck and the surrounding bushes. The pungent smell filled the air, a stark reminder of the gravity of his actions. He hesitated for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind, but the fear of being caught overwhelmed any lingering conscience. He knew there was no turning back. He soaked a rag in gasoline and stuffed it into one of the empty cans, creating a makeshift torch. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. With a flick of his wrist, he ignited the torch. The flame sputtered to life, casting an eerie glow on his face. He held the torch to the gasoline-soaked deck, and within seconds, the flames erupted. The fire spread quickly, consuming the dry wood with alarming speed. Bob watched in morbid fascination as the flames licked at the walls of the house, devouring everything in their path. He had to move quickly. He tossed the remaining gasoline cans into the inferno, adding fuel to the fire. The heat intensified, forcing him to retreat. He scrambled back through the woods, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the crackling of the flames and the shattering of glass as the fire engulfed the house. He didn't look back, afraid of what he might see. He just ran, desperate to escape the scene of his crime. As he reached his car, he could see the flames reaching high into the sky, illuminating the night. He knew that Havenwood would never be the same. The peaceful facade had been shattered, and he was the one who had broken it. He started the engine and sped away, leaving behind a raging inferno and a secret that he hoped would be buried in the ashes. But fate, as he would soon discover, had other plans. The flames roared, their intensity growing with each passing moment. The fire, fueled by gasoline and dry wood, quickly escalated beyond Bob's control. It became a raging inferno, a spectacle of destruction that illuminated the night sky and cast long, dancing shadows across Havenwood. The heat was intense, radiating outward and scorching everything in its path. The sound of the fire was deafening, a cacophony of crackling wood, shattering glass, and the whooshing of flames. It was a symphony of destruction, a terrifying soundtrack to Bob's desperate act. The smoke billowed into the air, a thick, black cloud that choked the sky and carried the acrid smell of burning debris. The once pristine air of Havenwood was now thick with smoke and ash. As the fire raged, it attracted the attention of the entire town. People emerged from their homes, drawn by the light and the noise. They watched in horror as Mr. Sterling's mansion was consumed by the flames, a symbol of their town's shattered tranquility. Some gasped, others wept, and all were united in a sense of disbelief and shock. Sheriff Brody, alerted by the dispatcher, raced to the scene, his siren wailing in the night. He arrived to find the house engulfed in flames, a towering inferno that threatened to spread to the surrounding woods. He immediately called for backup, summoning firefighters from neighboring towns. The fire was out of control, a force of nature that seemed impossible to contain. Havenwood was in crisis, its peaceful existence threatened by the flames of Bob's desperate act. The fire, meant to conceal a crime, had instead brought the darkness to light, exposing the secrets and lies that had been simmering beneath the surface of the town. Sirens wailed as fire trucks from Havenwood and neighboring towns converged on Mr. Sterling's property. Firefighters, clad in protective gear, bravely battled the raging inferno, their hoses spraying powerful streams of water in an attempt to contain the blaze. The heat was intense, and the smoke made it difficult to see, but they pressed on, determined to prevent the fire from spreading to the surrounding woods and homes. The wind was a factor, whipping the flames and carrying embers across the landscape. Firefighters worked tirelessly to protect nearby structures, dousing them with water to prevent them from catching fire. The scene was chaotic, a whirlwind of activity and a testament to the courage and dedication of the first responders. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as the firefighters fought the blaze. Some offered assistance, bringing water and snacks to the weary responders. Others stood back, their faces etched with concern and fear. The fire was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the destructive power of human actions. Detective Sarah arrived on the scene, her eyes scanning the crowd. She knew that this fire was no accident, and she was determined to find the person responsible. She spoke briefly with Sheriff Brody, exchanging information and coordinating their efforts. She knew that the fire had destroyed valuable evidence, but she was confident that they would find clues that would lead them to the truth. The investigation had taken a new turn, and Detective Sarah was ready to follow it, wherever it might lead. The fire, while devastating, had also ignited a new sense of urgency and determination to bring justice to Havenwood. As dawn broke over Havenwood, the fire at Mr. Sterling's mansion had finally been brought under control. The once grand house was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had befallen the town. Smoke still billowed from the wreckage, carrying the smell of charred wood and a sense of loss. The firefighters, exhausted but relieved, began to pack up their equipment, their faces grim with the knowledge of what the fire had concealed. The house was completely destroyed. The walls had collapsed, and the roof had caved in, leaving only a blackened skeleton of what had once been a symbol of wealth and power. The meticulously manicured gardens were now covered in ash and debris. The state-of-the-art security system was rendered useless. The fire had obliterated everything in its path, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. The townspeople gathered near the perimeter, their faces etched with sadness and disbelief. They watched as investigators began to sift through the wreckage, searching for clues that might shed light on the cause of the fire and the circumstances surrounding Mr. Sterling's death. The atmosphere was somber, a heavy blanket of grief and uncertainty hanging over Havenwood. The destruction of Mr. Sterling's house marked the end of an era for Havenwood. The town's peaceful facade had been shattered, and the secrets that had been hidden within those walls were now exposed for all to see. The fire had not only destroyed a building but also a sense of security and innocence. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, but the people of Havenwood were resilient, and they were determined to rebuild their town and restore its former glory. But first, they needed to find the truth, to uncover the person responsible for the murder and the arson, and to bring justice to Mr. Sterling and to their community. Detective Sarah surveyed the scene, her face grim. The fire had obliterated much of the evidence, but she knew that something, somewhere, would have survived. She instructed her team to begin a meticulous search of the ruins, focusing on areas that might have been shielded from the worst of the flames. She was looking for anything that could provide a clue, a hint, a piece of the puzzle that would lead them to the arsonist and the murderer. She understood the challenges. The intense heat had melted metal, shattered glass, and turned everything into a charred mess. But she also knew that fire, despite its destructive power, could sometimes reveal hidden details. She had seen cases where burn patterns had revealed the point of origin of a fire, or where the remnants of a specific accelerant had provided crucial evidence. Detective Sarah started her search in what remained of Mr. Sterling's study, the room where he had been found murdered. The room was a disaster, a tangle of twisted metal, ash, and debris. She carefully sifted through the wreckage, her eyes scanning every inch of the floor. She was looking for anything unusual, anything that didn't belong. She knew that the arsonist had been careful, but no one was perfect. Everyone made mistakes, and it was her job to find those mistakes and use them to bring the perpetrator to justice. She moved slowly and deliberately, her mind focused on the task at hand. She was determined to solve this case, to bring closure to the town of Havenwood, and to ensure that the person responsible for this heinous crime was held accountable. The search was painstaking and tedious, but Detective Sarah was undeterred. She knew that the truth was out there, buried beneath the ashes, waiting to be discovered. Detective Sarah moved with a purpose, her gloved hands carefully sifting through the debris. She was methodical, her eyes constantly scanning, searching for anything that stood out. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and ash, making it difficult to breathe, but she pressed on, ignoring the discomfort. She knew that time was of the essence. She carefully lifted a piece of charred wood, revealing a patch of blackened carpet beneath. She examined the carpet closely, looking for any signs of accelerant. She used a small tool to scrape off a sample, placing it in a sterile container for later analysis. She moved on, systematically searching the room, documenting every item she found. She paused when she came across a pile of melted metal. It was a twisted, unrecognizable mass, but something about it caught her eye. She carefully picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It was heavy, and she could make out faint traces of what might have been a design. She couldn't be sure, but it looked like it might have been a keychain. She carefully placed the melted metal in a separate container, marking it as potential evidence. She knew it was a long shot, but she had learned to trust her instincts. Sometimes, the smallest, most insignificant detail could be the key to unlocking a case. She continued her search, her determination renewed. She was getting closer, she could feel it. The truth was within reach, and she was not going to give up until she found it. The melted metal keychain, seemingly insignificant, might just be the piece of evidence that would unravel the entire mystery. Back at the police station, Detective Sarah carefully examined the melted lump of metal. It was misshapen and distorted, but she could still make out some of its original features. She used a magnifying glass to get a closer look, her brow furrowed in concentration. She noticed faint lines and curves that suggested a more complex design. She showed the object to Sheriff Brody, who was equally puzzled. He couldn't identify it either, but he trusted Detective Sarah's judgment. He agreed to send the object to a forensic specialist for further analysis. The specialist, a seasoned expert in metal identification, would attempt to determine the type of metal and the object's original shape. Days later, the specialist called with his findings. He confirmed that the object was indeed a melted metal keychain. He had managed to partially reconstruct its original shape using advanced imaging techniques. The keychain, before it was destroyed by the fire, had been in the shape of a miniature race car. Furthermore, he determined that the metal was a rare alloy used in the production of limited edition collectibles. Detective Sarah felt a surge of excitement. This was the break she had been waiting for. A limited edition keychain meant that there were only a few of these items in existence. She knew that if she could track down the owners of these keychains, she would be one step closer to identifying the arsonist and solving the case. The melted metal keychain, once a seemingly insignificant piece of debris, had become a crucial piece of evidence, a beacon of hope in the darkness. It was a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of paying attention to even the smallest details. The hunt for the keychain's owner was now on. Detective Sarah, armed with the knowledge that the melted object was a limited edition race car keychain, began her search for its owner. She started by contacting the manufacturer of the keychain, hoping to obtain a list of retailers who had sold the item. She explained the situation, emphasizing the urgency of her request. The manufacturer, sympathetic to her cause, provided her with a list of stores that had carried the keychain. Detective Sarah then contacted each store, asking them to check their records for any sales of the item. It was a tedious process, but she was determined to leave no stone unturned. After days of inquiries, she finally received a promising lead. A small collectible shop in a neighboring town had sold one of the keychains a few years earlier. The shop owner remembered the sale because the keychain was quite expensive, and the buyer had been very enthusiastic about it. He recalled the buyer's name, Bob. Detective Sarah's heart leaped. Bob. The same Bob who was already a prime suspect in the murder and arson. The same Bob who owed Mr. Sterling a substantial sum of money. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. The melted keychain, once a mystery, was now pointing directly to Bob. She immediately pulled Bob's file and reviewed his information. She discovered that Bob owned a classic race car, the same model as the miniature car on the keychain. The connection was undeniable. Detective Sarah knew that she had finally found her man. The limited edition race car keychain, against all odds, had survived the fire and led her straight to the arsonist and the murderer. The chase was about to come to an end. The time for answers had come. Detective Sarah, now certain of Bob's guilt, prepared to confront him. She gathered her evidence, the melted keychain, the testimony from the collectible shop owner, and the information about Bob's race car. She also reviewed Bob's inconsistent statements from their previous interview, noting the discrepancies and the palpable anxiety he had displayed. She and Sheriff Brody arrived at Bob's modest home on the outskirts of Havenwood. Bob answered the door, his face pale and drawn. He seemed surprised to see them, but he tried to maintain a facade of composure. Detective Sarah wasted no time. She informed Bob that he was a suspect in the arson and murder of Mr. Sterling. Bob's eyes widened, and he began to tremble. He denied any involvement, claiming that he was being framed. Detective Sarah remained calm and collected, her voice firm but controlled. She presented the evidence, one piece at a time, watching Bob's reaction. First, she showed him a photograph of the melted keychain. Bob stared at the image, his expression unreadable. He claimed he had never seen it before. Then, Detective Sarah revealed the information from the collectible shop owner, who had positively identified Bob as the buyer of the race car keychain. Bob's facade began to crumble. He stammered and stuttered, trying to explain away the evidence, but his words were hollow and unconvincing. Finally, Detective Sarah presented the information about Bob's race car, the same model as the miniature car on the keychain. The connection was undeniable, and Bob knew that he had been caught. The net was closing in. Bob's voice cracked as he finally confessed. He admitted to borrowing money from Mr. Sterling and to feeling increasingly desperate as the debt mounted. He recounted the events of the night of the murder, how he had gone to Mr. Sterling's house to plead for more time, and how a heated argument had escalated into violence. He explained that he had never intended to kill Mr. Sterling, but in the heat of the moment, he had struck him with a heavy object. He panicked, realizing the gravity of his actions. He knew that if he was caught, his life would be over. He then described how he had decided to burn down the house to cover up the murder and destroy the evidence. He had hoped that the fire would erase all traces of his involvement, but he had never anticipated that the melted keychain would survive and ultimately lead to his capture. He broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. He expressed remorse for his actions, but his words rang hollow. Detective Sarah remained impassive, her face betraying no emotion. She had heard it all before. She knew that Bob's confession was motivated by self-preservation, not genuine remorse. Sheriff Brody placed Bob under arrest, reading him his rights. Bob offered no resistance, his spirit broken. He was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed in shame. The nightmare was finally over for the town of Havenwood. The truth had been revealed, and justice had been served. Bob's desperate attempt to conceal his crime had ultimately failed, undone by a tiny, melted metal keychain and the unwavering determination of Detective Sarah. The keychain, an unlikely hero, had brought a murderer to justice. In the aftermath of Bob's arrest, Havenwood began the slow process of healing. The shock and disbelief gradually gave way to a sense of relief and closure. The townspeople, once divided by suspicion and fear, started to come together, supporting each other and rebuilding their community. Mr. Sterling's death, while tragic, had exposed a darkness that had been lurking beneath the surface of Havenwood. It had forced the town to confront its own vulnerabilities and to recognize the importance of unity and trust. The fire, while devastating, had also cleared the way for new beginnings. The charred remains of Mr. Sterling's mansion were eventually cleared, and the land was transformed into a community park. The park became a symbol of hope and resilience, a place where children could play and families could gather, a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, life could go on. Detective Sarah returned to her own county, leaving Havenwood in the capable hands of Sheriff Brody. She carried with her the satisfaction of having solved a difficult case and the knowledge that she had made a difference in the lives of the people of Havenwood. She often thought about the melted keychain, the unlikely hero that had brought a murderer to justice. It was a reminder that even the smallest, most insignificant things could have a profound impact on the world. She kept the keychain as a memento, a symbol of her dedication to justice and her unwavering belief in the power of perseverance. The case of Mr. Sterling's murder and the arson at Havenwood would forever be etched in her memory, a testament to the darkness that can lurk in even the most peaceful places, and the light that can emerge from even the most devastating tragedies. Detective Sarah found it difficult to forget the haunted look in Bob's eyes as he was led away. Despite his confession, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were still unanswered questions, loose ends that needed to be tied up. She decided to delve deeper into Bob's background, hoping to gain a better understanding of his motives and his actions. She started by reviewing Bob's financial records, looking for any patterns or anomalies that might shed light on his debt to Mr. Sterling. She discovered that Bob had been struggling financially for years, accumulating debt and making increasingly desperate attempts to stay afloat. He had borrowed money from various sources, including friends, family, and even loan sharks. She also interviewed Bob's friends and neighbors, piecing together a picture of a man who was perpetually down on his luck, but also prone to impulsive decisions and prone to exaggeration. They described him as a likable but unreliable character, someone who always seemed to be chasing a dream that was just out of reach. Detective Sarah learned that Bob's passion was his classic race car, a vintage vehicle that he had lovingly restored. He spent countless hours working on the car, pouring his heart and soul into it. It was his pride and joy, his one source of happiness in a life filled with disappointment. She realized that the race car keychain was not just a random item, it was a symbol of Bob's identity, a tangible representation of his passion and his dreams. This made his actions all the more tragic, a reminder of how far he had fallen. The investigation was officially closed, but Detective Sarah's quest for understanding was far from over. The story of Bob and the town of Havenwood would stay with her. Years passed. The town of Havenwood slowly returned to its former self, but the memory of Mr. Sterling's murder and the devastating fire lingered. The community park, built on the site of Mr. Sterling's mansion, served as a constant reminder of the tragedy, but also as a symbol of hope and resilience. Children played on the swings and slides, their laughter echoing through the park. Families gathered for picnics, sharing stories and creating new memories. The park became a place of healing, a space where the community could come together and celebrate life. Sheriff Brody continued to serve as the town's law enforcement officer, his experience with the Sterling case having transformed him into a more seasoned and dedicated protector. He never forgot the lessons he had learned from Detective Sarah, and he strived to uphold justice and maintain peace in Havenwood. Detective Sarah, though miles away, often thought of Havenwood and the people whose lives she had touched. She occasionally received updates from Sheriff Brody, keeping her informed of the town's progress and its continued healing. She knew that the scars of the past would never completely disappear, but she was confident that the community would continue to grow stronger and more united. And the melted keychain? It remained a cherished memento, a symbol of the power of perseverance, the importance of attention to detail, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can emerge, and that even the smallest things can make a big difference. The story of Havenwood and the melted keychain would be a part of her forever. The melted keychain, displayed in a clear evidence bag, sat on the table between Detective Sarah and Bob. It was a silent, unassuming object, but it held the weight of the entire investigation, the key to unraveling Bob's carefully constructed web of lies. Detective Sarah watched Bob closely, observing his reaction as he gazed upon the distorted metal. "Do you recognize this, Bob?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Bob hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth between the keychain and Detective Sarah's face. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I've never seen that before." Detective Sarah raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "That's funny, Bob," she said, "because we found it in the ruins of Mr. Sterling's house. And it's been identified as a limited edition race car keychain. A keychain that, according to a local shop owner, you purchased a few years ago." Bob's face paled even further. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands trembling. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was trapped, cornered by the evidence and his own lies. The melted keychain, a silent witness to his crime, had spoken volumes, revealing the truth that he had tried so desperately to conceal. The game was up. There was nowhere left to run. He was exposed. The air in the interrogation room grew thick with tension as Bob's carefully constructed defenses crumbled. He hung his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The weight of his guilt, the burden of his lies, had finally become too much to bear. Tears streamed down his face as he began to speak, his voice choked with emotion. He confessed to everything, his words tumbling out in a torrent of remorse and self-loathing. He recounted the events of that fateful night, the argument with Mr. Sterling, the accidental blow that had ended his life, and the desperate act of arson that he had committed in a futile attempt to erase his crime. He spoke of his financial struggles, his mounting debt, and his fear of losing everything. He explained that he had never intended to hurt anyone, that it had all been a terrible accident. But Detective Sarah listened impassively, her face betraying no emotion. She had heard it all before, the excuses, the justifications, the self-serving narratives of those who had committed terrible crimes. She knew that Bob's confession was not about genuine remorse, but about self-preservation. He had been caught, cornered by the evidence, and he was now trying to minimize his punishment, to paint himself as a victim of circumstance. But Detective Sarah was not buying it. She had seen the darkness in his eyes, the desperation in his actions. She knew that he was guilty, not just of manslaughter and arson, but of something far more profound, a betrayal of trust, a violation of the innocence of Havenwood. The confession was complete. The truth was finally out. Bob's story was over. As Sheriff Brody led Bob out of the police station in handcuffs, a stunned silence fell over Havenwood. The news of Bob's arrest spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the community. People gathered in small groups, whispering in disbelief. They couldn't comprehend that someone they had known for so long, someone who had seemed so ordinary, could be capable of such a heinous crime. Bob had always been a familiar face in Havenwood, a regular at the cozy corner, a participant in town events. He was one of them. And now, he was a murderer and an arsonist. The betrayal cut deep, shattering the town's sense of security and trust. Many felt a sense of anger and resentment towards Bob for disrupting their peaceful lives and tarnishing their town's reputation. Others felt a sense of sadness and pity for him, recognizing the desperation and bad luck that had led him down such a destructive path. The arrest of Bob brought a sense of closure to the investigation, but it also opened up a new chapter of healing for Havenwood. The townspeople needed to come to terms with what had happened, to process their grief and anger, and to rebuild their community on a foundation of honesty and trust. It would be a long and difficult process, but the people of Havenwood were resilient. They had faced adversity before, and they would face it again, together. Bob's actions had shaken them to their core, but they would not be broken. They would emerge from the darkness stronger and more united than ever before. Havenwood would heal. As Detective Sarah drove away from Havenwood, she reflected on the case, on the events that had transpired, and on the people whose lives had been forever changed. She thought about Mr. Sterling, the enigmatic businessman whose secrets had ultimately led to his demise. She thought about Bob, the unlucky man whose desperation had driven him to commit a terrible crime. And she thought about the people of Havenwood, whose resilience and unity had inspired her. But most of all, she thought about the melted keychain. It was such a small, insignificant object, yet it had played such a crucial role in solving the case. It was a reminder that even the smallest details could have a profound impact, that even the most unlikely things could hold the key to unlocking the truth. She had learned many lessons throughout her career as a detective, but the Havenwood case had reinforced one lesson above all others: never underestimate the power of observation, never dismiss the significance of seemingly insignificant details, and never give up on the pursuit of justice. The melted keychain had become a symbol of that lesson, a tangible reminder of the importance of her work. She knew that she would face many more challenges in her career, many more difficult cases to solve. But she would always remember the story of Havenwood, the story of Bob, and the story of the melted keychain. And she would always carry with her the belief that even in the darkest of times, the truth can be found, and justice can prevail. She hoped Havenwood would continue to heal. The people of Havenwood, united in their grief and their determination to move forward, began the arduous task of rebuilding their community. They organized fundraisers, volunteer efforts, and community meetings, working together to heal the wounds that had been inflicted by Bob's actions. The community park, built on the site of Mr. Sterling's mansion, became a central gathering place, a symbol of hope and renewal. Townspeople volunteered their time and resources to create a beautiful and welcoming space, a place where children could play, families could gather, and memories could be made. New businesses opened in Havenwood, bringing fresh energy and opportunities to the town. Neighbors helped neighbors, offering support and encouragement. The sense of community, once shattered by Bob's betrayal, was slowly being restored. The people of Havenwood had learned a valuable lesson, that even in the face of tragedy, hope can prevail, and that even the smallest communities can overcome the greatest challenges. They had emerged from the darkness stronger and more united than ever before, their bonds forged in the fires of adversity. Havenwood was once again a peaceful and close-knit community, but it was also a wiser and more resilient community, a community that had learned the importance of trust, unity, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. And as the children played in the community park, their laughter echoing through the town, it was clear that Havenwood was not just rebuilding, but thriving. The town had a new beginning. The story of the melted keychain would be passed on for generations, a reminder that even the smallest things can make a big difference.